In today's video, I'll be sharing with you an entire day's worth of World War I meal plans and menus for the lower class. With inflation and the rising cost of groceries, I decided to look through these World War I meal plans and menus, which includes two sections, one for the higher class and one for the lower class and the poor. And I was curious to see how people made it through the hardest times throughout history. These were not direct rules and regulations, rather they were suggestions on how to shop and feed your family on a lower budget and still remain healthy. And that was the goal of the Food Administration. And I have to say that it's not at all what you would expect, as everyone ate from scratch in those days, and everyone ate natural foods. In part one, I did the diet for the wealthy, and if you haven't seen that yet, I'll link it down in the description box. My morning begins much easier than the women of World War I, as they would have not had electric stoves, and they would have had to stoke the fires to begin anything. For me, I'm getting coffee started, which is on the menu. We'll be having coffee for the adults, and for the children, milk. In fact, it was very important that every child drink a quart of milk a day because this was the cheapest source of a high amount of protein and calcium in their diets, which is very important for bone and muscle growth. We're starting out today with oatmeal and dates. Every day starts with some type of breakfast cereal, bread, margarine, coffee for adults, and milk for children. And so for today, we're having oatmeal with dates, and dates is our source of fruit. There were several recommendations for the low-cost diet, and one of them was purchasing either dried or canned fruits and vegetables. Nothing fresh, as fresh would have costed so much more. It was also recommended to have margarine instead of butter. Let's face it, as homemakers, we're always out grocery shopping and trying to get healthy food for our families. However, something you might not have considered is the fact that there is another source of chemicals hiding within your food, and that is through your cookware. I wasn't even aware of this, but 97% of Americans have toxins running through their bloodstream which are related to PFAS and other types of toxic chemicals that are released into their food and into their bloodstream through things like Teflon and even storage containers that you might not be thinking of. It only takes 2.5 minutes for Teflon to reach high enough temperatures to emit those toxic chemicals into your food, and then as you eat it, it's in your bloodstream and it's there forever. The sponsor of today's video is Caraway. Caraway is a brand that is dedicated to bringing you 100% non-toxic cookware that you can feel good about using and cooking for your family with. Caraway uses a ceramic coating which is naturally slick and gives you those easy slide off eggs and an easy cleanup. Caraway is having their holiday sale and it's their biggest sale event of the year. You can get up to 25% off site-wide by using my code INF-FARMWIFE. The link will be down in the description box. You can also use the QR code listed on my screen. If you've been checking out Caraway's website and have been admiring their beautiful cookware in an assortment of colors, then now is the time to go check it out. And I highly recommend checking out the cookware set like the one that they sent me. It includes a sauté pan, a frying pan, a Dutch oven, and a saucepan. This includes lids for all of the pots and pans, a lid holder for easy storage, and a magnetic pot rack so that everything fits very nicely into your cupboards without having to stack everything and it getting messy. Buying the set like this saves you 20% versus buying everything individually. And act now, because with this deal, you'll get a free Graza Frizzle Spray with every single order. And the more you spend, the more you save. The highest tier gets you a free bar set with your purchase. And this is one of their newest additions. I want to thank Caraway for sponsoring today's video. Freshly baked bread was a huge part of the diet back in those World War I days. And for breakfast today, we're having rye bread, as wheat was something that we had to minimize. We could still use it, but we had to minimize our use and include other grains. So we'll be having that rye bread toasted with a margarine. They could also use different types of plant oils or drippings. This was one of the differences, as in the high-class diet, they used butter. Butter, sugar, wheat, and meat were all things being sent off for soldiers to fight the war. And so we are limited on some of these resources, sugar being one of them. We have it, but we are minimizing our use because although it's available, it's very expensive. And so I'll be using only 1 sugar cube in my coffee and no sugar in my oatmeal. This seems like a suitable breakfast, but we'll see how it tastes. The coffee is acceptable, but not what I'm used to. The oatmeal was rather bland, and I definitely thought that it would have been sweeter than it was with those dates. However, without any added sugar, it just fell flat. And I was desiring more creaminess as well. The freshly baked bread was very good, and this was the highlight of my meal. Very comforting. This meal had sustenance and it did what it needed to do, but it was quite flavorless and I was daydreaming of how good it could have tasted, even though it didn't. A good housewife always plans meals in advance, and so I have these peas that I've soaked overnight, ready to go for our pea soup for tonight's dinner. Although they wouldn't have had a slow cooker like I do, they would have had a pot boiling at the back of the stove all day long. And so I'm replicating that by using a slow cooker. And I'm adding a bay leaf for some added flavor, as there won't be a lot going into this soup. Now, one of the surprising things about the low-cost diet is that it was recommended to go vegetarian every day, not just once a week like the higher class. I've got some dried soaked apricots here. This will be part of our lunch menu as a dessert. And dried fruit was how we were going to be having any fruit in our diet. In replacement of meat, we will be having peanut butter, cheese, beans, and peas instead. Cheese was considered a very high value protein food. And so that's what we will be having in our lunch today. We are having something called Samp with cheese. Samp was a hominy product, and I could not find that product because it is a pearled hominy. So instead I have hominy grits, and this was what I could find locally to me. We'll be cooking this according to the package directions and pouring it into a greased casserole dish and letting it harden by refrigerating it overnight. Corn was a big part of the diet. I did find following some of these recipes rather difficult because there is a lot of assuming that they already know how to do things, and so there's not a ton of instruction. So I just cut these into slices, and then I grated cheese to put on top. This meal plan did come with a grocery list, and so I knew exactly how much cheese, which was 1/4 pound, needed. I've actually read a book all about cheese during the wartime period. They did scientific studies on cheese and found that cheese had double the amount of protein and fat pound for pound as steak. And so it was a very valuable meat substitute. And it's comprised of a third water, a third protein, and a third fat. With our lunch today, we'll be having whole wheat bread, margarine, with peanut butter, and then stewed apricots. The cheese and peanut butter being our protein source. And then more milk will be given to children at lunchtime. Something to note was how hungry I was in between breakfast and lunch. I wasn't expecting this because my previous World War I meal was very similar, but I was so full. However, portion size did play a role, and I was more conscientious of that this time around. And so I think that might have made a difference. I'm not quite sure. I do regret doing a meatless day for my part one of this video, as I think that it would have shown a higher contrast to have done a regular meat day. Moving on, I'm interested to try out this lunch. I honestly had no idea what to expect, as grits is not something that we eat a lot of here in Canada. Wow. That's actually really good. I'm surprised. Very impressed. I was really quite surprised with the grits and cheese, as I was expecting it to be much more bland than it was. It was quite tasty. And then the bread and peanut butter was what I would expect because I've had it before. The apricots were delicately sweet and quite lovely. Yes. This meal was a win, but we still have dinner to go. We'll be making a dried applesauce out of dried apples. I dried these myself in my dehydrator. And there was no recipe included in the booklets for this. However, I did find a blog online that had a recipe, and so I'll share that link down in the description box. And what I found out was that dried applesauce was actually a really big deal because it was supporting patriotism and supporting the local economy. We are basically rehydrating those apple slices in simmering water, and while that happens, I'll be making a recipe for cornbread. For tonight's dinner, we'll be having split pea soup, cornbread, margarine, dried applesauce, as well as milk for children. Now, this cornbread recipe is not typical, as it uses yeast for leavening instead of baking powder, and it doesn't have any sugar. I was very skeptical as to whether this recipe was going to work out. One of the things that I noticed when I was looking at the low-cost meal plans was that lunch seemed to be the bigger meal of the day, and dinner time seemed to be more just a meal to get you by. A lot of times it would have just been cornmeal mush and bread for dinner, but it seemed like they always included some type of dessert, and I believe that this was a way to get fruit and other things into the diet. I was not really liking this recipe, as it just didn't seem to me like it was going to work. And it was recommended in the recipe to bake it for an hour and a half. And to me, that just didn't seem right. So we need to let this mixture sit and rise. Because wheat was something that people needed to use less of, there were a lot of different breads being made out of corn and barley and different grains. So while that sits and rises, we will attend to this applesauce. And I'm draining out the liquid. It's supposed to rehydrate and then mash into an applesauce. But it was not as easy as it seemed. I was beginning to feel desperate about this dinner. Everything about it just didn't seem to be working out for me. I decided to work on rehydrating these apples a little bit more, and then I decided to put these in my blender. Now, I know that this is a modern appliance. However, it was recommended to use a food chopper, which is what they would have had. So I figured that this was close enough. I had a glimmer of hope as I watched that blend up, and the consistency was good, so I decided to taste it, and I was pleasantly surprised, actually very pleasantly surprised, and this really gave me hope for the meal. I decided to divvy this up into different serving dishes so that we could all have a little taste. There wasn't a ton, but it was really, really good. I was so surprised. I sprinkled a little bit of cinnamon sugar on top. In goes the cornbread into a preheated 350-degree oven. We'll see how long it takes to bake because I doubt it's going to take an hour and a half. And then it's time to attend to my split pea soup. This is a very plain soup, including only the split peas, water, salt, and pepper for flavoring. And the soup was quite runny looking. We'll just say it was not as thick as a soup that I would normally make. So, time to taste it and see how I feel about it. The only hope is to add more seasoning to try to get the soup to taste better. I'm starting to feel quite hopeless about this dinner as I've invited my adult son and daughter over for dinner tonight. And I'm very reluctant as to whether anyone will like this meal. Although the cornbread was cooked, it seemed like it could fall apart very easily, and so I had to be very careful with it. I set the table for all who were invited, and we are all going to gather together and taste.
That's good.
My husband liked the soup. That's a win.
Salt or pepper, but there's too much of one of them.
I wasn't too surprised at my son's comment, knowing that I overdid it with the salt and pepper. My husband gave away his cornbread. I detested the cornbread as it wasn't sweet at all, and it just was not good. However, the pea soup was enjoyed, and the applesauce was delightful. Surprisingly, the entire pot of pea soup got eaten, as well as the applesauce. There was just a few pieces of cornbread left at the end of the meal. If you enjoyed this episode, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. This will be a series on my channel. Don't forget to check out Caraway's offering of their biggest sale of the year. You can save up to 25% site-wide with my code INF-FARMWIFE. You will also get a free Graza Frizzle Spray on all orders, exclusive to my audience. The more you spend, the more you save. And at the highest tier, you'll get a free Caraway Bar Set. their brand new launch. Don't wait to grab this deal. Head down to the link in my description below and use the code INF-FARMWIFE. Thanks for joining me today, and I'll see you next time. Have a wonderful day.